Good morning. We have quite a few registered participants for today's webinar, and we'll give them a minute for them to join before we get started. A very good morning to each and every one of you. Thank you for joining us today for TalesCon, the virtual IT sales conference. Today's theme is amplifying IT sales in uncertain times. And we have a fantastic lineup of speakers from the industry. Some housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded and shall be made available to all registered participants after the webinar. All participants will be on mute and can send their questions to the organizers, Jesse, Pankridge, or Victoria via chat window. There are 2 white papers available in the handout section, which you can download too. Before we move on, I would like to take a moment to introduce TALSMART. TALSMART is a global player that imparts industry-relevant, practical sales competency using industry experts and principles of neuroscience. TALSMART's training is highly contextual, extremely sticky, and enables the development of muscle memory that creates lasting changes in the key salesperson attributes of courage, compassion, and commitment. TALSMART is headquartered in Dallas, Texas. Moving on to the agenda, we will start with opening remarks by our board member and CEO, Jesse Seen, followed by a keynote titled How Software Sales Leaders Can Create a Winning Culture in Uncertain Times to Achieve Business Results. We will then have a panel discussion on managing IT sales in the new normal. There will be an opportunity for all you to pose your questions to the panelists before we close the event. Before I move on to the next slide, I'm requesting for all speakers to share their webcams. Thank you. Our speakers today are truly global and based out of the United States, Canada, United Kingdom, and India. We have Steve Rosen, the president of Star Results, Heather Snyder, the chief revenue officer at Omnia Group, Bob Apollo, the founder and chief outcomes officer at Inflection Point, and Paul Brickford, the director of sales enablement at LucidWorks. Finally, we have PK, who is the Chief Business Officer, and Jesse Seen, who is the board member and CEO of TALSMART. With this, I will hand over the stage to Jesse Seen and request all other speakers to turn off their webcams.
Thanks so very much, Christina. Can you guys hear me? Christina, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, guys. So, hi, I'm Jesse Seen. I'm the CEO of TALSMART. Oh, thank you so much, Christina. So I'll start with this sales conference with the poll question: what is the biggest challenge while selling IT products and services today? So I'll give you guys a couple of seconds to a minute to respond to that in the chat. All right, that's interesting. So the biggest challenge with most of the leaders like you feel is establishing a connect with the right stakeholder. Very right. Then second is being viewed as a trusted partner to the client. Amazing. Identifying the right opportunity. Very, very nice. And very few of you have put negotiation as the very last option. Yeah, it's kind of true. Establishing a connect and the right stakeholders is the key. So, guys, I'll just start with my introductory message, and then I'll pass it on to the speakers and PK for the panelists as well. So, Ruka, that's basically what we coined a theme here. It was first coined by the US Army War College while it was preparing for its officers to lead extreme and dangerous conditions in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, over the years, the term has been seized by business world, including us in this webinar, and is often seen as a practical code for situational awareness and readiness in volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous times. As you can see on the slide, the US has been negatively impacted on all fronts: people, economy, and financial markets during this recent pandemic. More specifically, I would like to highlight that the real GDP growth fell during the second quarter of last year by over 30%. And especially for all of us in sales, that was really, really, really tough. So, through our research, we have found four VUCA factors impacting the IT sales. The first one is volatility in revenue streams, derailing smooth conduct of business. As per a quantitative study conducted by Contepsa, nearly 74% B2B reps expressed that their sales opportunities have decreased post COVID-19. Moreover, they also claimed that they lost nearly 65.2% of their deals due to the pandemic. The next one is uncertainty and confusion amidst the new modus operandi. Another significant change has been the urgent need to shift to the virtual communication and even virtual selling to ensure social distancing. Statistically speaking, as per a study published in Forbes titled How to Turn B2B Buyers into Sales Leads, according to data, as many as 89% of B2B buyers report relying heavily on the internet for their B2B product research process. The third point, my friends, is around complexity in purchase decision making. Due to pandemic, additional constraints are now influencing the already multidimensional purchase function of B2B buyers. As budgets are tighter, there's a landscape tendency across industries to cut down on discretionary expenditure, delay not too urgent processes, and stick to only necessities for the time being. As per the Gartner research, around 77% of B2B buyers have suggested that arriving at a buying decision in this current environment is turning out to be very complex and difficult for them. Final point is around the dipping morale amidst this ambiguity. Again, statistically speaking, as per an article published in the New York Times titled How Bad is Unemployment? Literally, off the chart. Nearly 20.5 million jobs were lost in the United States by April making COVID-led situation the worst devastation since the Great Depression. Such national news statistics have been creating tremendous negative impact on the workforce, creating an unparalleled fear psychosis amidst the ambiguity about the future. So how can we successfully navigate the virtual ID sales? Again, through our research, we have found a 5 prolonged strategy to work, which you can see on the slide. In a nutshell, it is critical for each team member of your sales team to have a future forward mindset. This is very important, my friends. It's not only important for the salesperson to evaluate the current needs of the customers, because whatever you're selling at this point of time is also obsolete. Somebody else in any part of the world and doing the virtual selling is taking the lead and also learning from you because the competition learns very fast. No matter whatever you do, whatever changes you bring, your competition will kick in very, very fast. But so, one thing is your teammates having the future forward mindset, but also they should be exploring the unknown needs, which will surface in future. Because we talk about the known needs and also the unknown needs. And majority of the time, the magic happens in the unknown needs. And also you and your teammates are able to create a pipeline because of that. And finally, keeping them motivated and secure while at the same time helping them as a trusted advisor to the client. So with this, I come to an end of my welcome address. Thank you again for joining. I hope you enjoyed the keynote and the panel discussion. I look forward to interacting with all of you guys. Now, please help me welcome Stephen Rosen, the president of Star Results, for his keynote on how software sales leaders can create a winning culture in uncertain times to achieve business results. Thank you. Over to you, Stephen.
Well, thank you, Jazzy. What a great opening. Welcome, friends, colleagues, and hopefully some new friends. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Stephen Rosen. I'm the president of Star Results, and over the last 18 years, I've helped hundreds of sales leaders achieve star results through coaching and mentoring and training. I've been recognized as one of the top 50 influencers by Top Sales World. If you're an IT sales executive, then guess what? You're in the right place. I'm very excited to share some tips and gems on how and where to amplify your culture in the new normal. Jazzy has talked about a lot of the stuff that's happened in the new normal. I want to provide you some input in terms of, if you go to the next slide, to my agenda slide, please. Next slide, please. Beautiful. Thank you so much. The reality is we've all been impacted. No matter, no, go back one slide, please. Many of us have struggled in 2020 due to COVID, and some of you have had a great year and found ways to succeed. Back 2 slides, please. My goal today is to provide you with some very simple yet highly relevant tweaks to help you amplify your sales. And that's why we're all here, right? We're sales executives. And here's sort of my 3-point agenda. I want to keep it very simple and salient to you. One, I'm going to talk about the new normal and what's happened and what I've seen as a consultant to the industry. 2, how to amplify your sales. And 3, how to amplify your culture. Now I'm going to move quickly. So if you like, get out a notepad and a pen. And if there's some cool stuff that I share that you want to take down, please take a note. If you guys are ready, I'm going to start and I'm going to move quickly. And in fact, the slides are moving so quickly I can't keep up. But in all fun of it, this is one of my favorite quotes. And as an IT sales leader, you know that effective sales leadership is not about making speeches or about being liked. Sales leadership is defined by results, not attributes. And the reality is that your effectiveness is as a result. Your effectiveness, you're only as effective as the results that your team delivers, right? That's the reality of the world. Next slide, please. Just sort of sharing with you the journey we've been on, and we call it the evolution of the sales leader. But if you recall, about a year ago, when COVID first hit, all we did was hunker down. We were only concerned about the health and welfare of our teams. And as time progressed, the virus tailed off, and we had basically a sales gap to fill, and that's where we focused. Now we need to find ways to achieve our goals pandemic or no pandemic. That's the reality of 2021. And as you look at the new normal, let's start by acknowledging that your sales reps, their world has been turned upside down. Next slide, please. They have gone from directly visiting customers or working in an office setting. Now they work from home, dealing with much more stress and uncertainty. It's been very difficult reaching customers, especially given they're also working from home. It's been infinitely more difficult to arrange group meetings and bring influencers to the table within a company. Therefore, our sales reps find themselves talking to one voice within the organization, and this is really a killer in a complex IT sales environment. Many have been trying their hardest to adapt to virtual selling, but they've lost that proximity to the customer, right? That interaction, that body language, which virtual selling is not as easy to do. As all of us, they feel isolated, anxious, and fearful, given the unemployment levels, and if sales are not coming in, they're anxious about the future. What we've seen is travel has now been replaced with countless virtual meetings. Yet, what I'm seeing is much lower productivity from sales organizations. And this is likely your new normal, is it not? So let's just talk about, if we can move to the next slide. According to McKinsey, 90% of business to business has transitioned to a virtual selling model. And like you've probably invested in virtual sales trading. But if your team's still struggling with selling virtually, the reality is you're not alone. And really, this is what I've observed, and I wonder if you're finding the same thing. But even though despite extensive training of your sales team, there's still reluctance or resistance to virtual selling, your reps are doing less calls, even though they have more time given they're not traveling. They're dealing with customer frustrations, not about them, but just people are frustrated in general, especially having to do virtual meetings constantly. And it's challenging to hold their customers' attention in a virtual setting. Many are still struggling to become master virtual sellers. Some have even had challenges, even though they're in the IT area. Some of the older sales reps, not to pick on older sales reps, but many have had challenges adjusting to using technology. And what I've seen is, and maybe you've seen this in your organization, sales reps are reluctant to let their sales managers sit in on their virtual calls. As a result, all of these challenges, we've seen the following impact. If you can turn to the next slide, please. We've seen a drop in 3 areas. Call effectiveness has dropped for many of the reasons I've recommended. We've seen lower productivity levels. And as a result, besides the economic situation, sales have suffered. So let's look at your reality as a sales leader. If you move to the next slide. Your reality hasn't changed, right? You still need to deliver results, which means you either need to maintain and grow your existing business or develop new business. Those are the 2 avenues to go. And as a result, you have only a couple levers you can pull as the head of sales. I was an old VP of sales, and I realized I can't make the sales happen. I can only pull certain levers to really impact sales from my role. So 1, I've narrowed it down to 3. 1, you can adjust your strategies. 2, you can restructure your organization. Or 3, you can tweak your sales culture. The reality is you can't stop the car to fix the flat tire. You need to fix your challenges in real time. So let's do a quick poll. If you can actually put up the next slide and then the poll, I'll just set up the poll in advance, please. So the question is, if you want to amplify your sales right now, because we're all about the immediate, right? Where should you start? Do you first adjust your strategies? Do you first restructure your organization? Or do you tweak your sales culture? Can you please put up the poll and let's see what what the attendees have to say. So if you can please pick which one you would start with first. Not say they're not all important, but where's your starting point? Okay, another 10 seconds, and well, let's look at the results. Okay, so pretty well, not an even split, but strategy number one. Structure is secondary. I guess folks don't want to make major structural changes. And culture was third, very close to strategy. Okay, so I'm going to share my experience with you, and I have lived in a sales environment. And if you move to the next slide, you folks are not far from traditional. I guess which is a good thing or a bad thing, but traditional IT sales organizations will focus on developing their strategies. Then they put structure in place to support the execution of those strategies. And what we see is we tend to see little effort on building that winning sales culture. And the problem with that is it leads to, if you don't have a healthy sales culture in place, in times of change, we see productivity drop. We see resistance from sales reps to execute new strategies. And of course, when we restructure, we wonder why there's so much resistance and things are not working. Because with putting strategy first, and I guess you guys put culture second, it's almost like putting the cart before the horse. So given your reps world has been turned upside down, you need to make sure that you have a healthy sales culture first. That ensures a couple things. One, your team is highly productive and engaged. And those teams that are highly productive and engaged have customers who love and buy more from them. A winning sales culture based on values such as focus, accountability, and people development tend to win in the long run. In the new normal, a winning culture becomes a critical success factor. It's up to you as a sales leader to create that winning culture and to keep your team highly motivated and engaged. Next slide, please. So if we can, I'd like you to take away a couple takeaways today, and one that I feel is relevant, and I know it's not the obvious area to start, but really all three are important components to success. But the key takeaway today is your sales culture is the foundation of success of your sales organization. Once you have a healthy sales culture, then you can look at having the right strategy and the right structure in place. They're all important, but let's not forget the importance of culture, especially in the new normal. Let's go to the next slide. And really, here's a few questions to reflect on. I'm not going to get feedback on those, but if you guys can think about this. And one, do you have a winning culture or a healthy sales culture in place? And you can type in the answers if you like. I'm not going to. And the question is, how do you know? Are you gauging the health of your sales culture? Are you measuring it? When was the last time you did a sales rep engagement survey, especially through COVID? I don't think anyone's taken the time to say, hey guys, we want to know how you're feeling. Do you know what the level of engagement is within your sales team? Are you gauging rep productivity? Are you gauging turnover rates? What percentage of your team are making quota? Has it improved or dropped? I assume it's dropped. And have you made quota in your last year? And how about your last quarter? So let me set up another question. If you can move to the next slide. So we've talked about culture being a critical success factor. And the fact is you can't change your whole culture overnight. And that's why a lot of people think, okay, culture is fuzzy. So here are 5 areas that I feel are critical to a successful or critical characteristics of a successful or a healthy sales culture. 1 is cadence and accountability. 2 is clarity of communication. 3 is we collaborate, yet we're competitive as well. Number 4, we celebrate success and individual contribution. And 5 is coaching and development. If you were to focus on dialing up one area of your sales culture, what would that be? And Sunny, if you can put up the poll, perfect. You're rocking. So pick one of the 5, and then we'll talk about sort of some observations that I have over the course of the last year in what we call the new normal or the sort of the COVID world. So pick which area you feel, if you were to focus on, would have the biggest impact on amplifying your sales. Okay, let's give it a couple more seconds and then let's see the results of what the group of IT sales leaders have to say. Okay, so the number one area that that has come up is coaching and development, and interestingly enough, celebrating success and individual contribution. Okay, I think those are great. Third, clarity of communication, collaboration, and competition. And then lastly, cadence and accountability. So I'm not going to share anything earth-shattering, but I do think there's maybe a different approach you can take, and I'm going to share with you why. So let's just move to the next slide. I'm just going to talk about what I've seen. Okay, so in each of these 5 over the course of the last year, I've seen a reduction or less focus on cadence and accountability. Many sales leaders have backed off on holding their sales reps accountable to key activities. They've stopped reviewing performance weekly, monthly, and quarterly during COVID, and we know the reasons why, because results weren't that great and they didn't want to demotivate their people. In terms of clarity of communication, I've seen many sales leaders do a great job improving the clarity of communication, more virtual meetings, and ongoing updates for their sales team. Third, in terms of collaboration, we've seen collaboration go up, where there's a lot more sharing of best practices than I think before. And there's probably been a reduction in sort of this competitive environment where we're trying to help everybody succeed. Number 4, celebrating success and contribution. I've seen that go up significantly, that sales leaders have tapped into the real importance of celebrating small successes, not big ones, but small ones, and also taking the time to recognize individuals. In the last area, coaching and development, I've seen a significant reduction. And you guys have put this, that's the most important area. And I'm going to talk about how you can capitalize on it or leverage that. But post-COVID, sales managers, or sorry, pre-COVID, your sales managers, your frontline sales managers would go on what I call the ride along. During COVID, there's a lot more time being spent phone coaching and less time sitting in and observing calls. And reps have become resistant and anxious to have their sales manager involved in their sales calls. So let's move to the next slide, because what I'm going to share with you is what I believe are the 2 things that are critical to impact your sales over the short term or through this new normal. Number 1 is amplifying your coaching. Everyone put that down as their, or not everyone, 44% of you said that was the number 1 area. The last area I believe that's really missing, and I'm going to explain to you why and how, is that you need to tighten up your cadence and accountability, and that scored last. So we got first and a last that I'm going to spend some time talking about, because I think it'll illustrate some opportunities for you. Next slide, please. So why amplify your coaching culture? Well, the reason why coaching is so critical is you can have significant impact on sales. Coaching is the number one sales management activity that drives sales performance. Coaching improves sales rep engagement and reduces turnover. And if you have a lot of millennials in your organization, their expectation is not that you will coach, but that you do coach them. They expect to be coached. Next slide, please. So you may have seen this slide before. I present it quite frequently, and that coaching effectiveness drives 19% more sales. Sales managers who are highly effective coaches will drive 19% more sales than their less effective counterparts. More coaching drives more sales, regardless of how good it is. Sales reps that receive coaching significantly outperform those who don't receive coaching. Having a formal coaching process helps close 18% more deals. And the stats speak for themselves. They go on and on and on, but those are 3 that I wanted to share with you. So let's talk about different types of coaching and what we're seeing in the new normal. Next slide, please. So I've broken down coaching into 3 buckets. One is deal coaching, which we've been doing prior, and it's really about, it could be done in a virtual one-on-one meeting with the sales manager and his or her reps. And it's strictly focused on How do we move this deal forward? The sales manager is asking some really good questions to help the rep think and facilitate the process. The second type we're seeing is what I call pre and post call coaching. Okay, so the sales manager may not sit in on the call, but the sales manager is going to speak to the rep before and after the call to debrief, which can be focused on skills or moving the deal forward. And the last coaching, which you notice is in red for obvious reasons, is skill coaching, which is sitting in and observing the sales reps do their virtual selling calls. And it's the only way to know how effective your sales reps are at virtual selling. So the question you have to ask yourself is, are your sales managers sitting in on those virtual calls? And what's happened to the ride-along where a sales manager would spend a day with a sales rep, reviewing how they're doing and getting them to self-evaluate. Next slide, please. As I've said earlier on, many of you have focused extensively on training, whether it be technology training, selling virtually, and various ways to be better at the virtual selling approach. The problem is, without coaching, your training dissipates within a short period of time. By combining coaching with training, you get a 4-to-1 improvement relative to training alone. So if you want your salespeople to become master virtual sellers, coaching is key. Next slide. So just to end this off, I want to give you 5 key tweaks. I'm not saying to change your culture, 5 key tweaks you can do to amplify the coaching in your organization in the short term. So number 1, the drum roll, please. Number 1, if you can advance the point. Coaching starts at the top. So if you as the head of sales are not coaching your frontline sales managers, it shows that you're, one, not buying into the coaching approach. You're not modeling coaching behaviors. And really what you need to be doing is spending time with each of your sales managers, coaching them on how they're coaching their salespeople. That way you reinforce the coaching culture. Demonstrate that coaching their direct reports is a priority. Number 2, make sure your sales managers understand that their job should be at least 50% of their time should be spent on coaching and developing their salespeople to get better at virtual selling. Number 3, it really requires a shift in how you approach conversations. And really the mindset shift of coaching is moving from telling people what to do to asking and facilitating the process. Number 4, ensure that you put in plans for each of your sales reps. I know we do IDPs, but IDPs are an HR process that we put in plans for each sales rep, how they're going to improve. If you want to focus on virtual selling, great, but every rep should have a coaching plan that the manager and the rep work with. And lastly, number 5, it's very easy as a senior leader to say, hey, sales are off, we're going to back off on coaching, let's do something else. Coaching requires you staying the course. And especially in times of challenge, it's much more important we spend time coaching, as you all agreed. So stay the course, don't worry about sales, keep coaching and getting your people better. Next slide, please. So the area that's very interesting, and it's not intuitive that you should be spending more time on cadence and accountability. And it wasn't that intuitive to me until I had a discussion with one of my customers. And they had a significant reduction in sales force. They went from 18 salespeople down to 6. And I said to the sales leader, I said, how are you leading that? That's going to be a real challenge. And he said to me, Stephen, I'm not leading, I am managing. I need to get people to do certain jobs, and I'm going to make sure and hold them accountable to doing it. And it's like, oh, it's true. Sometimes we have to, not that it's tough love, but sometimes we have to be very clear in our expectations. A lot of companies have held off on managing performance. Have you done that in your organization? You're probably concerned about demotivating your salespeople or being perceived as a micromanager. So we all backed off on really looking at the accountability component. Well, top performers, it's an insult. They want to know how they're doing. They want to know what their score is. What are the expectations and how are they doing against them? When times are tough, it's critical to focus on very specific activities that are going to drive results. So if you've backed off, it's time to amp up your cadence and accountability. Leadership without accountability is leadership without credibility. So let's talk about 5 ways you can dial up the accountability and cadence in your organization. If you can move to the next slide, it'll illustrate the points. So number 1, next slide, please. Okay, I can continue talking without the slide, but you may want to make a note of the key points. I'm just going to, I got a slow network connection, so hopefully you're hearing and seeing me okay. So number 1, yeah, here we go, beautiful. So if you can go back a slide, I know once you press a couple times, okay, this is perfect, leave this as it is. So here are my 5 tips, okay, to really amp up cadence and accountability. You need to decide what activities, one slide back, please. Decide what activities are critical. If it's prospecting, if it's cold calling, if it's following up on your key leads, I don't care what they are, but what needs to get done? What jobs do you need to get done? Establish standards for those critical activities. How many per week, how many per month, and then communicate clear expectations. If you go back a slide, I'm not sure if you're hearing me, but measure. You need to, so 1, decide what activities are critical. 2, establish performance standards. What is the expectation? And make sure that's clearly communicated. Measure those critical activities. Gain commitment from your team that these are critical and that they're committed to a certain level of performance, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4. And the last item I talk about is establish sales management cadence. Okay, and I can spend an hour talking about cadence, but here's some key tips. So in establishing cadence, the one key point is you need to schedule these meetings in because sometimes they don't happen. And the key to really establishing that accountability and cadence is establishing at least 3 months of meetings with your sales reps. If you're meeting them once a month, put those in the calendar so they know they're going to be held accountable. If it's quarterly business reviews, put those in your calendar. And it's really about following through, and so they know that you're committed to following up on these. Make sure you're holding your reps accountable for past results and activity, but that doesn't really change what happened. So one of the key tips I've always learned in reviews is always focus forward. 80% of your time in a review should be focused on forward activities because you can't change the past. What will the rep do in the next month? So I want to share a tip on, and this comes from one of my colleagues, Mike Weinberg. He calls it his, I call it a wrap meeting, but it goes as such. There's 3 things in a monthly meeting that you can conduct in an hour. 1, you review sales results. That's the R in wrap. 2 is you review activity. Has the rep exceeded their activity targets to drive the results? If they haven't, then really is, what is your plan for next month? So review sales, review activities, and see what the rep has planned for the next month. I just want to wrap up now. So you can go to the next slide. Just to summarize, 1, everything has changed, yet everything remains the same in terms of expectations. Your sales leadership effectiveness is defined by results. Top IT companies focus on culture first, structure, and then strategy. And if you're going to focus in any area, coaching and cadence have the biggest opportunities to improve sales. That's my summary. Next slide. This is me. You can reach me at 905-737-4548. I'm in Toronto, Canada, or you can visit my website at starresults.com. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Pankaj Kejariwal, Global Business Head and co-founder of TALSMART, to lead the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve, for these amazing insights. Really appreciate your views around culture being the foundation, while structure and strategy follows suit. Moving on to the next section, we have a very interesting panel discussion, managing IT in the new normal, for which we have three eminent panelist members. I'd like to welcome Pedro Snyder, Chief Revenue Officer of the Omnia Group, Bob Apollo, Founder and Chief Outcome Officer of Inflection Point, and Paul Bickford, Director of Sales Enablement. All of you today, valuable insights and experience. Let's kick off the discussion with the first question. Goes, can we bring clients back to the best practice in every COVID? Kedra, you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Kedra, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, sorry, I think there is some internet issue. Okay, Kedra, when the pandemic broke out, how did clients' budgets get impacted? And what were the new best practices on how to navigate sales in a post-COVID world?
Right. Well, first of all, budgets were impacted immediately, right? I mean, if we go back and think about a year from now, from our perspective, things just shut down for a little bit. It's like everything just stopped while people figured out how to get safe, how to work from their homes, how to figure out what was going to happen to their businesses. So I don't know that necessarily it was just budgets that were impacted, but human psyche was impacted. And it took a while to figure things out. How that impacted sales was, first of all, you just had to take care of, just like Steven said and Jazzy said, we had to think about our people first, the well-being and the safety of our employees before we could all think about how to keep going and running our business and running sales. Once things, became the new reality, that's when we all had to pivot to the how can we salvage what we have? First of all, I think every organization out there who's still here today to talk about it focused first on their customers, their clients, and taking care of them and making sure their clients were okay. I know at the Omnia Group, we spent a bit of time just focusing on how to help our clients. So we offered support in helping them shift to the virtual workforce. We do learning and development, so we help them think about how do you conduct virtual webinars, virtual selling with your clients. And then you had to think about where is business shifting and who out there is thriving even in this, because some businesses have thrived through it, or who's at least still making money and able to spend money. And so as this progressed, I think every organization then started thinking about what do we need to do to shift our focus, our offerings, and make sure we're focused on those industries that are going to make it through and still have money to spend. So it was a lot of, first of all, just pausing and taking care of everything you had in your universe, and then thinking about how you were going to adjust to be successful going forward.
That's a good perspective, Kedra. I think this is a time when I think companies also start taking people first as this sign of gesture. The people are the most
Yeah, PK, this is Jesse. I think
important
there might be some issue with your headset or mic.
assets
If you can
and
completely
customer
remove
second.
that.
So I remember one company which have a very strong policy of people first and customer second, and like you balance it out. My next question, 20.
Yeah, PK, sorry for that. Seems like
Is it
there might
okay,
be some issue
Bob? Can
with
me?
your headset. Can you just completely remove your headset and use just your laptop or computer mic?
Sure, I will do that. Now it's better?
Yep.
Yeah, it's better.
Hello? Okay. Bob, this is a question for you. In your opinion, what's the best way to budget for the sales quotas in 21 and beyond? What's your perspective here?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that just looking back on how you started in 20 and taking it from there is going to work particularly well. I think the first thing we need to do is to be very, very clear about who our target customers are, whether they're the installed base or new business. And as we've heard from some of the other contributors, different industries, different organizations have come through this with a different capacity to invest in IT. And when I think about the profiles of the customers I'd target, and therefore how I'd establish quotas, it's a sort of understanding of, are they taking a defensive or an offensive approach to dealing with the current situation? Are they hunkering down, or are they thinking that this could give them an opportunity to increase their market presence if they only could get focus? So I think we have to be, it's not just a matter of inheriting last year's quota with a bit of modification. I think we have to rethink who we're targeting and what we expect them to be investing in IT solutions and services.
I think great perspective, Bob. I definitely agree with you. I think, as Ken also mentioned, I think we need to rejig our portfolio and get insights what worked in 20 and how to go for 21. My next question is for Paul. Paul, can you, this question is directed towards you, Paul. Given the significant impact on certain industries such as travel and hospitality, what steps IT companies and salesperson take to de-risk their revenue growth targets, especially the IT companies which have targeted, say, aviation domain, or say travel was their biggest domain.
So can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And if they lost that, but these two domain, how do they risk and still make up the numbers, Paul?
Thank you, PK. You were breaking up there towards the second half, but I'm familiar with the questions. And so I think one of the things to look at, you mentioned like, travel and hospitality being, impacted, and how do we shift for that? So I think about in buying motives, they all fall, there's several, there's probably a dozen, but they all fall into two categories: hope for gain or fear of loss. And fear of loss is always more powerful than hope to gain. Having something taken away and losing out is far more powerful than hoping to gain something. And I think when we look at risk mitigation, when we sell software, we're basically selling 4 things: a customer's ability to make money, save time, or reduce stress. And you could argue that save time fits with product inefficiency, productivity, reducing stress is around mitigating risk. So we have these industries like travel and hospitality. So we focus on what aspects of our software create higher levels of efficiency, because as companies have scaled down their workforce, they're asking people to do more with less. So what elements and capabilities of our software allow people to get more deliverables, more work outputs with less manpower or in less time? And so that's something to really leverage. By the same token, you've got people that are companies that are just trying to stay relevant enough to stay in business to make it through. But I think the flip side, going back to maybe even a little bit with the previous question of quotas and proper territory planning, if you can sell into, and I know it depends on what you sell, or if you go after certain verticals and not others, but where can you do more where people are impacted positively by the current state, like a Zoom, like people in the medical industry with medical equipment and those sorts of things, where there's a larger demand for product in given industries. Where can we supplement where we feel like we might make less in territories to gain more from people that have money to spend, trying to keep up with the additional demand in their products and services because of current state, versus others that have been impacted negatively, so that at the end of the day, we can meet those quotas that had been set.
I think one of the things to add to that, because it was a very good summary, a lot of companies will plan their full year. And I think given the situation is so fluid, that almost planning quarter to quarter or half to half becomes a much more realistic way to look at the business, because things are changing. Whether we have people vaccinated within the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months will really impact and affect how we what results we drive in terms of bottom line. So so looking at a full year is always tough, but doing it in a fluid situation is nearly almost a fool's way of doing it, because you're going to be wrong. You're going to be maybe taking shorter term, keeping the sales force focused on shorter term goals, and even your investors focused on shorter term is much more realistic approach to take than to forecast the full year, not knowing or what the levels of uncertainty that we're dealing with.
Great point, Steve. Thanks a lot for the addition which you did there. Peter, thanks for answering this. This question is for Peter. Peter, I want to ask you, in these tough times, how the sales leader can retain the talent, and for example, in your organization, what are the steps which you are taking to retain the talent?
Sure, thanks, PK. I think the most important thing to start with is knowing your talent. Knowing what you have, and again, because things have changed so much, it's taking different types of selling skills. So consider what your needs are, do a talent assessment, find out what you have, and make sure people are in the right seats is really key. And as Stephen talked about culture, and the polls showed that everyone does believe one of the biggest differences we can have is by focused on coaching. Well, make sure you know what you're coaching to. So figure out what you need, figure out what you have, figure out what your salespeople's strengths are. And of course, I lead an assessment company, so we're always going to recommend that you're using data and science to do that. I also think the focus on personal accountability is key. So if people are clear on what's expected of them, just like, again, Stephen talks so well about in building a culture of accountability and cadence, if they know what they're accountable for, give them the tools and the resources to be accountable to doing that, but make sure they have the skills as well. So don't hold their feet to the fire if you haven't been clear about the expectations, you haven't been clear about where their strengths are, where their gaps are, and what their personal action plan needs to be to develop and get further. So I think, again, like it's been said, this is the time to really focus on people, focus on making sure they're in the right roles and it's aligned to what your organization needs to be successful, and then put all the tools in place to help them do that.
Good.
Did we just lose PK?
We may have.
Yeah, I think so. He had a spotty. PK, are you there?
Oh,
All right, no worries, guys. So I'll just continue. So, I may ask, like, given the move to virtual sales, how have you changed your sales team structure or model to ensure you are geared for continued success? Paul, if you can answer and Bob can add up to it.
Sure.
Yeah, sure. So what I would say is really taking a look at how are people prepared to utilize the virtual platforms in a way that they would in face-to-face sales conversations. How are they engaging people? You know, one thing that happens a lot, especially in a virtual environment, is, and you have people, they don't have their cameras on, or are they distracted, making meetings interactive. And we should already be doing that face-to-face, but how often do we get on and it's demo time and we're showing features, or we're talking about who we are and what we do, and it's a general best practice anyway. Like I teach presentation skills about how to get people involved emotionally in the business discussion, and it's like getting people to share, using polls like Steve was doing, using the chat function. Hey, please put in if you have any questions. Hey, I'm going to call on Jerry. Jerry, would you mind answering? What's the biggest thing that you've learned so far from what I've shared here, based on what you wanted to learn about how our capabilities can help you? And then be quiet. Let Jerry go, well, and guess what? Everybody else on the call is going, man, we better pay attention, you know? And hey, let's go around, guys. I'm going to ask everybody on the call, what's the biggest question that you have that if answered would make you most comfortable in dealing with us? Now I'm just shooting from the hip with these, but the key is to engage people, and then they know, okay, you're going to ask me, you're going to talk about it, and trying to get people to know that they need to be engaged. And what's the other win? I get real-time feedback on where everybody's head's at, so I can be audible ready in case I go, okay, we need to scrap some of this, what they want to know. And some of this has to do with meeting planning, but things can come up. You get people on the meeting that were not originally on the list, and they show up, you know, and you have to be nimble, or other things have occurred to them while you're talking and they want to know more. So it's always making sure that it's a collaborative interaction back and forth. And I say that, getting to the point of your question, it's more crucial now in a virtual environment where people are multitasking, and getting people to really be engaged with giving the right answers for the things we need to know to progress in the sales cycle and in their buying process.
Yeah, if you'd like me to add to that, I mean, I really reinforce what Paul's been saying. In fact, I think what's happening in the world of virtual selling is it has made good practices, which were always important in having good interactions with customers, even more important. You know, the salesperson who maybe got away with winging it, turning up without thinking about the purpose of the meeting or the conversation, making it up as they go along. You just can't get away with that nowadays. So I actually think that the salespeople that have mastered this the best are actually taking a disciplined approach to making sure they run good meetings. They're making sure the agenda's clear up front. They're agreeing how much time is going to be spent on each of the key topics. They're asking, to your point, Paul, each of the participants what they want to get out of this conversation in order for it to be a success. And I think absolutely, definitely, they need to avoid monologues. You know, the more you can break up the conversation by engaging all of the audience members, and by the way, if they've told you what they need to get out of the conversation for it to be successful to them, that gives you a much more specific way of testing whether you're making the progress that they were looking for. I think the one other thing that I've seen used to great effect is an old Sandler technique, which I think some people call the upfront commit. And that is, once we've established the purpose of the conversation, once we've got the agenda and the objectives, we pre-position the next step that we would like the customer to take, assuming only that the agreed objectives of the meeting have been achieved. And I think that tactic has become even more powerful in a world of virtual meetings, because it means we're not scrabbling at the end of the meeting when time's run out to agree what a next step should be.
Yeah, you're right. And to me, it's very confusing as well when you have multiple meeting requests and then you send it to one person or two, and then they're sending those meeting invites to so many other people, and you have absolutely no idea who are you going to talk to, which function are they from. So sometimes I think it helps if you can see who all are going to join, and if you can send an email to your coach or anybody who's there that, hey, if you can tell me a little bit about the audience, that'll be easier. You
For
say,
sure,
Heather and Stuart?
but sometimes you have to work with the cards you've been dealt, right, and react accordingly.
Yeah. So there's a question from the audience that in a small business selling environment, what are your main priorities when selling, or what would be the main pain points? So it's slightly open-ended, but so I'll repeat the question again and we can debate and discuss. In a small business selling environment, what are your main priorities when selling, or what would be the main pain points?
I'm going to jump in and say I would need more information, or maybe this response is appropriate. It depends on what's important to the customer. The pain points are based on what they're dealing with, and it's going to be different for any company regardless of size. Certainly, with SMB that you're going to have shorter sales cycles. Ideally, you have personas that you want to go after, where we kind of understand based on the industries that you're calling into and the key players, the kinds of job titles you're going after, that we have a feel for the kinds of things that they deal with in general. But it's about asking those questions for them to say in their language, in their words, what are the issues that they have? What are the biggest priorities? What have they done to address those? And what are the impacts because of the issues that they're having? And that could depend on a lot of things based on the individual, the industry, that particular company. So there's a lot at play. So I don't think there is one pat answer, but I think that's about doing a good initial qualification and then ultimately a good discovery. And I'm open to obviously any contrasting feedback from others, but that's my take on it.
Yeah, I won't contrast at all, just to jump on it. I think the key is really big. If this is about selling to small business SMB, and particularly when you're thinking about IT sales strategies, you've got to focus on how you're going to help them move the needle, which you always do no matter what your customer is. But when you're talking about an IT solution, one of the main concerns could be, do they have the resources to pull it off? So they could see how the solution is going to be valuable to their business or help maybe their business be more productive. But the worry in a small business is always, do we have the staff? Do we have the bandwidth to do this? Do we have the time, the money, the people, the energy? So I think when you're selling IT solutions, part of that solution is going to be, how are you going to help them move that needle? How are you going to help them? How do you paint that picture that this is all about making them more productive, effective, efficient, streamlined, and that you're their partner in doing it?
Anybody else who wants to add?
Yeah, I think for small businesses, it's a lot about making their lives easier rather than more complicated. Giving them confidence that if they go with you, they'll get the outcomes they're looking for. If they're not very technical, and I'm not sure leading with technology is a good idea anyway, we should, really understand what would make a valuable result for them. To Paul's point, Paul talks about using personas. I think we need to do as much research as we can. Maybe that's more difficult with small businesses, But I always like going in with at least a hypothesis, an informed judgment based on your experience of what other similar organizations have done, not assuming, but testing a hypothesis about what's likely to be relevant to them. It's a hell of a lot better than asking them what keeps them up at night.
Yeah, please never ask that question again.
Yeah, I came up with something I like that's just saying, hey, especially if you're doing an initial qualification and they really don't even, they're like, no, we're good, everything's great, we're happy. And just say, hey, when's the last time you met with your boss or your peers or your people? And they go, well, this morning, why do you ask? I'm just curious, what are some of the things you talked about in that meeting that you're trying to accomplish? And usually you can either flesh out current issues or goals that they're trying to reach, and then figure out what are the gaps or dovetail that into, you know, some of the other things that resonate with what we offer in the way of a solution.
Yeah, Stephen, anything you want to add?
No, I think part of it is, regardless of the business, you want to understand what their challenges are, and some of that's either through doing effective research prior, you know, speaking to other people in the organization, and or asking some good questions so you can lead the meeting as opposed to come with a set presentation, but really understand where their pain points are, and then dig a little deeper. Maybe it's just a situation of exploration as opposed to trying to, you know, sell on your first call, but really understand what their issues are.
Yeah, true. No, I agree with all of you. I think my 2 cents here are, you know, I go with a technique called quick touch, quick info. When you're trying to sell in a small business environment, people are super busy. They are they're wearing multiple hats, and the key thing here is just pinpointing to your value proposition very quickly and sifting it through. If they are interested, then you start telling the story. Don't start with the story and then, you know, go ahead towards the value proposition, because people do not have time. But anyway, let me take another question. You know, given the significant impact on certain industries such as travel, hospitality, what steps should IT companies and salespersons should take to de-risk their revenue growth targets? Because I know many of my friends have lost jobs, especially bigger companies like IT services, because majority of their key clients were into either hospitality or travel, and I believe last year it was oil and gas sector. When all of these sectors start to decline, so what can salespeople do, or what can sales leaders do if they are selling into those key accounts? Bob, if you want to take, or Paul, you want to take this question?
Go ahead, Bob.
Okay, well, I think so. It partly depends on whether you've got a horizontal or a vertical value proposition. If you've got, by that I
Can you hear me?
mean a solution that could appeal across multiple industries that you've just happened to sell to travel and hospitality, or whether something you've built specifically for travel and hospitality. I think if I was a horizontal provider, firstly, I'd be looking within my installed base for the organizations that have a proactive approach to dealing with today's challenges rather than completely defensive. I'd be looking for showing them how I could help bring reduction in cost or increase certainty to their business. And you know, but if it's more of a horizontal proposition, I would be urgently looking for other industries where our value proposition is likely to resonate, who may be in a more positive mode for investment.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think some of my answers, or a lot of my answer to you know, the previous question spoke to a lot of what I would respond here, so I won't be redundant, but only to say that maybe add on that if there's an opportunity to look at where we can add value from a compelling event standpoint. I think about teaching call planning, sales call research and preparation in any environment before COVID or otherwise, was you have to find a compelling event with the organization where a significant outcome is involved. There's an owner of the event, there's a time date to when something needs to be accomplished. And that's, I think everybody's familiar with that, but I was like, guess what? COVID is a compelling event. This is a big deal. This creates compelling events. And I think, you know, people's jobs are on the line, and not just people that have been let go, but now they're working with such a finite budget. When that champion or sponsor of your deal decides to spend the money with you, if it goes bad, well, besides the fact that now they have less money for other things, there's lots of compromises. And if it goes bad, that can cost somebody their job or even a career. I knew a situation where a CFO had done something and was very well respected amongst their peers. It went very poorly. And this was in an environment where things were going well. And, you know, within 6 months to a year, he wasn't with the organization anymore. And so I think we have to understand the impacts on the human beings behind these, you know, decisions, and show them we're not just trying to help you with what you're doing. We're trying to help you as people. We're trying to help you with not just surviving, but thriving with whatever that looks like. And those human touches, those relationships really seem to resonate. And I've been part of deals and companies where we do deal reviews and go, why did we win that? And so often it says, well, we just trusted you more. We felt like you cared more about us. We felt like you listened better than the others. And so we felt better. It's like warm fuzzy to a degree, and it's business, but it's people with people. And I don't think we can poo-poo that or be dismissive of that more emotional intelligence piece of things. And so just another piece, I think, to add on.
Yeah. Anything you want to add, Stephen and Heather?
No?
No, I think that was well said.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, I know, you know, going forward, there's this question from the audience that if culture is so important, why do you think most companies ignore or miss out focusing on this? Stephen, I think this is a straight one to you.
Well, I think I mentioned it within my presentation, but it's a great question. And, you know, culture is a fuzzy thing where strategies and structure are much more clear and defined. So the sales leader kind of understands culture, but if they're not measuring it, they don't know where the deficiencies are. So they immediately default to areas that there's a greater comfort level. And you know, even if you asked folks out here and said, can you define your culture? It's very difficult to do. And hence even the areas that I put down, every company is different, but every company has similarities in terms of their culture. And unless you're sort of gauging it on a regular basis, then you tend to avoid it. And sometimes you've got healthy cultures that would just develop because there's great leadership and understands that. But in a lot of cases, the easier areas are to focus on, you know, tactics in many cases, you know, even as opposed to strategies. The sales leader, it becomes very tactically oriented and forgets some of the critical parts of what they're due to do is to form the culture within the subculture of the organization.
Yeah, I mean, you don't create a culture with a presentation or a mission statement or what have you. You create a culture, I believe, through the way you behave. And I remember when I joined HP, it had developed an organic culture called the HP way, but they didn't start by defining the HP way. I mean, this is a long time ago. They captured how they had behaved into a, you know, a documented mindset. And I remember we had a competitor, a UK computing company, who you could see they'd done it completely the wrong way round. They'd tried to establish their culture by defining it first, rather than making it a reality, and it was a complete failure. You've got to live the culture. You can't define the culture, or at least you can't start by defining the culture.
But I think what you can do, what I talked about, is you can amp up certain parts, you can dial up to reinforce what's critical. And I think if you try to take on every component, some of it's just really realizing what's important now and what do we really want to emphasize within the organization, and have your whole sales management team, whole leadership team responsive and supporting and reinforcing, whether it's celebrating successes, which I think is a very important thing to be doing in times of uncertainty, then it becomes more of a concerted effort to dial up certain components of your culture.
Yeah, and it's celebrating behavior and not just success, I think.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's about addressing, employee engagement. In some companies, it's a buzzword. I work for some companies like Trulia, it's just an example, where they embraced it and really pushed that and drove that, and employees felt like they were really heard on these, annual assessments or biannual assessments of what would you like to see, what would you like to change, and they would come back and say, we've heard you, we're now going to do this, we're now going to change that, now we're implementing this here, and people really felt like they had a say in the way the company was, engaging. And then I think the other piece, like you're talking about, is what's acceptable behavior, what's not, where are we going to focus our communications, where are we going to, celebrate successes, how are we going to encourage a safe environment where you can fail, but fail fast, as a colleague I know likes to say, where it's okay to make mistakes, I'll learn from it, move on, versus going, if I do this based on our culture, I'm going to lose credibility, or we used to call it at Ferguson a CLM, a career limiting move, and so I think all of that plays in to people feeling like, it's a place they want to work and they feel safe and they can take chances and progress. So those are just some other thoughts.
Yeah, back to something Paul said earlier, there's a compelling event going on for all of us right now, right? Inside our companies and inside of our customers' companies. And I think leveraging that compelling event could really fuel what your culture is going to be coming out of this. I think everyone to some degree is going to have to be uncomfortable. They're going to have to show vulnerability and create a safe, trusting environment where people can learn how to adjust in this new world of selling. You think about it, the sales leader and the salesperson are no longer side by side. Think about all that time on what I call the soft edges of going in and out of calls, and the time you had to prepare beforehand. You don't get that today, just like you don't get that time with your client. So finding new ways to have those conversations, and back to what Paul said, if you can find ways to engage your employees in the solution, here are the challenges. Now, how do we go about figuring out the solutions, and let's test and keep iterating and making it safe to do so. I think you can really see some advances made by this event.
Awesome.
But y'all have to be able to show some vulnerability to do it.
No, thank you. Great, guys. Now, there's another question from the audience. The question is, with coming into a new market, do you start knocking on doors and getting your name out there, or start with research on the prospects so you are armed with knowledge? Well, still very open kind of question, but I'll repeat it once again, and let me know who wants to take it first. So with coming into a new market, do you start knocking on doors and getting your name out there, or start with research on the prospects so you are armed with knowledge? Who wants to take it?
I guess I was just going to say, I think it's, and I feel like it's maybe a cop out, maybe not, but to say, well, both. And what I mean is, I think if I had to pick one, I'd say the latter, research. By the same token, if I'm going into a market, I know who the usual suspects are with the other players, and I look at how are they marketing, and I can participate in something where in a similar fashion with how they are going to market, like an old world might be a trade show or a conference or something where there are booths set up, and I say, okay, that's virtual now, what can I participate in that the others are playing in? Or if I'm going after specific industries, what industry association or organizations can I become a part of to start letting people know that, hey, I'm not just looking for your business, I'm looking to contribute to the greater group think with where things are heading. Join some LinkedIn groups for an industry or for certain key players. So I think it's because I think that's part of the research.
Right.
Hey, we've engaged a little bit. Here's what we've seen. We're trying to put our name out there. This is the reaction we've gotten back so far. Meanwhile, doing a lot of research on the industry, how your capabilities play into what the goals are for the companies that you want to go after. So I think it's both, candidly. But again, I'll defer to my peers for other thoughts.
Well, I think one of the challenges, if you, for example, we were just relying on desk research, is you never know whether, you know, the assumptions you're making are valid until you've engaged in some conversation with people. I've also found it a perfectly legitimate move. You're not trying to sell something to your potential audience right at the start. You're trying to understand more about what's important to them. And I think people are open to being asked their opinion, their view, their perspective, as long as you respect them by not immediately jumping into a sales pitch with them. Yeah, that you're respecting their time. In the future, you might get an opportunity to sell something appropriate to them, but right now you're trying to learn from their experience and from what's important to them. I think if you try and do the research in a box, you know, you just digest lots of information. There is unlimited information, isn't there, available to us? I think unless you've tested it with a few human beings, you're never going to know.
Yeah, it's not a chicken or an egg factor. It's you've got to do both at the same time and learn your way through. And through that approach of speaking to people, what you do is you gain your knowledge, but you also gain some relationships, because it's not a transactional discussion. It's a value add, and it's people always want to share their thoughts on things and feel that they're the expert.
Yeah, it's truly integrated. You do your research by knocking on doors.
Yeah, got your point. Another question by the audience, guys, and this is also very, very close to my heart as well, because I've been researching on it, that how do you really bring the personalization on a face-to-face meeting in a virtual world, like in a virtual setting? And to me, it was like, how do you develop a relationship on a virtual setting or a virtual connection world? Anyone wants to start?
Well, I think Bob was saying that the importance of call planning. We can't wing it anymore. So you have got to find ways to integrate what you used to do as you walked into the, you know, up from the elevator into the setting and got to intermix, you know, intermingle with other people. You've got to find ways to build that into your meeting. So any way you can to engage them, like Paul said, engage them in the chat, ask them questions, make sure that you're demanding that interactivity and set that tone for the meeting is key. I think also, and I think we've all seen it this last year, we're all working in our home environment, so just be real about it. Not a big fan of the virtual backgrounds. Just show your space, show who you are, and honor your clients for doing the same. Because just like you used to learn something about your client by looking at their office or their, you know about their workplace culture, you can gain a lot of that by gauging what's in their office or behind them, and finding ways to ask and just be human about it. I think that's really key. I think some of us are letting technology get a little bit too much in the way, and we just got to be comfortable with it, because we're all, like we've seen on this call today, we're all dealing with some challenges together. So why not show that and be that as a way to unify?
I think another thing that I took from a guy who's a kind of sales training guru that I really liked, one of his books, he talks about asking the sponsor, how can I make you look good here? I'm going to be talking to your boss's boss in meetings, and what you do in your function is going to come up. And so what can I do to really help you shine, as you were kind of helping me navigate this, so that you look good at the end of the day here with what we're doing. So I'm talking about helping this person with their social capital, their peer interactions, the way they're perceived as credible in their organization. And again, it's just that personal touch. And I often talk about, when teaching salespeople with individuals, there are three things, if you can get to them, is the way the person is compensated, measured, and evaluated. And if I can understand that and talk about how what we're offering will enhance or could enhance those things, they really feel like we're helping them individually, because nobody's doing that. I mean, that's not something people traditionally will do or talk about. Calling somebody or reaching out an email, not because you need something, but hey, I was thinking about you, and this is something I saw that's related to where you went to school, and I thought you'd find it interesting. Or hey, I learned that they like sports, and so I saw this thing for this team that you mentioned that you like, or you mentioned that your son plays baseball, and I saw this thing, the Little League World Championship. I thought you'd find that interesting. But just anything for them to go, wow, you paid attention, you asked questions, you remembered, and you're thinking about me. And some of the top sales people in the world prior to the digital age, maybe some still do it, would send out greeting cards and handwritten notes to customers. And some of these very simple things that created a personal touch, where some of these guys built empires, multi-million-dollar empires, on being individual contributor salespeople, on some of these simple things that made people go, you remember me, you're thinking about me, and you kind of value and who I am as a person.
And I think that's the essential component that we lose, that we feel pressured for time in a virtual meeting, and don't take the time to, if it's a new person, get to know a little bit about their family,
Right.
what hobbies they have, what are they doing during COVID, what are they doing to manage the stress before you get into the business. I think there's two components. One, the relationship is built on value, but that personal contact of knowing a little bit about them, getting to a little more personal, a little more real, I think makes the difference. And one without the other, I think you're at a competitive disadvantage.
Yeah, you're commoditized, right, at a point without that.
Yeah, you're right. And the way I look at this whole scenario is looking as an upgrade from doing selling on the phone to selling it on the computer when people can actually see you. What we've been talking about is this a change or degradation from a physical one-to-one meeting going to a virtual one. But if I just cut it out for a single moment and I say, okay, fine, guys, I get it. But what about we were selling in a world where we're just selling on the telephones or conference calls, which people still do,
Yeah.
call you up and they get your credit cards out. Maybe, it's a simple sale, but they do that. So if I look at this as a motivator, that now we have an upgrade from just a phone kind of calling to a virtual calling where you can show your face. And I think you're very right, Heather. I really like it that instead of these backgrounds and stuff, show who you really are, and this is what you are. If I'm struggling, yes, I'm struggling. And if I'm really happy, I'm really happy. Great. Great, guys. So there's another question by the audience, and we are just 3 minutes out, so I'll just quickly take it. So can you share some tips and tricks that have helped IT sales leaders really seal the deal in the current VUCA environment? So this is back on us again from the audience that, hey, you've been talking about the VUCA word. Here you go. Quickly, just 30 seconds.
Very quickly, one of the things I've seen people very successfully seal the deal on is focus on delivering value quickly. And that might mean looking for a smaller project than you might have done in pre-COVID days, because I think what customers will sign up for are things that are strategically relevant to them, they're tactically urgent, compelling event, and they're confident you can deliver value quickly to them. And this is part of them feeling good, right? The choice they made, their colleagues will see the impact in a short period of time.
Good point.
What I would add is don't let go of the ones who got you here. So we've talked a little bit in this panel today about shifting our focus on different industries. But your clients out there in the industries that are struggling still have problems and still need you. I would do everything you can to support those clients through these tough times, whether that means maybe discounting or offering extension on payment, offering support for them. They will remember that when things get better. So take care of the ones who got you here while focusing on the ones that are going to help you keep growing.
Yeah, I'd say I'd finish with something. I was doing a training on selling in a COVID world. I've done it a few times in the last several months. And I'd say, I think to some degree, COVID has become a red herring where it's become an excuse, a catch-all for any level of underperformance or any problem. It's like, well, there's COVID. Well, guess what? There are people in your industry, maybe even on your own sales team, that are, doing really well. And it's easy to say, well, that's their territory, or well, it's, and it's like, I think of a story very quickly where there was a salesperson who said, well, it's because I'm getting poor marketing leads. And then they started doing well later, and they said, oh, and they were high-fiving everybody and saying, I'm making it happen. They go, wait, you can't take credit. It's must just means you got better marketing leads. So marketing gets the credit, not you. And you go, what do you mean? They said, you can't have it both ways. It's either you all the time or you none of the time. And I thought, wow, that's really powerful. But anyway, I know we're at time, but you made me think of it, Heather, so I wanted to share.
All right.
And if I can add, As to my talk, as a sales leader, it really comes down to leading, but also managing. And if you don't have both going on, you're not going to get the performance that you need. And to me, it's fundamental stuff. Doing the fundamentals really well are going to help your team move forward, are going to help you execute what you need to execute. And you do need to manage performance and activity. I mean, you can back off on results, but your team needs to be doing the work required to be successful. And the top performers want that anyways. It's maybe the people who are not making it are pushing back in that environment, but that's the way it goes.
All right. Thank you so very much, guys. We are out of time now. I want to sincerely thank each one of you and all of our attendees for taking time. Guys, as a giveaway to this sales conference / webinar, we are actually going to send you links for the Omnia personality and behavioral assessments, and also TALSMART's sales hunter assessments, which are geared specifically for the IT, software, and technology sales leaders and salespeople. So you can leverage that to test your team's readiness and their behavior and their personality judgment, and more so if they are geared for this post-COVID environment. But anyway, with that, thank you so very much, guys, and have a wonderful day and a good week ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks for your time.
Bye-bye.